We talked about changes in species distributions. Interestingly, the suitable climate for people is expected to move northward as well. So that's not to say that people can't live in certain places, but the places that are going to be most comfortable for people to live are actually moving northward by about 2070. So it's not going to be very pleasant to live in a lot of the eastern United States because it's going to be very, very warm. And there will be a lot of days over 100 degrees. There's some interesting tools where you can look up how much hotter it is now than it was when you were born. And so this is some information for Ruston. The area averaged 75 days when the temperature climbed to 90 degrees or higher in 1960. And you could expect to see 107 to 137 days over 90 degrees by the end of the century. So that's like, a third of the year will be over 90 degrees. So that's a pretty substantial change from 75 days. It's not doubling, but it's not terribly far from doubling that number of days. So if we think about climate change, these are the relevant questions. Is it occurring? The data overwhelmingly says yes. Are humans causing or contributing to it? Overwhelmingly, the data says yes. Is climate change bad? Well, you can decide that for yourself. What do you think? What should we do something about it? And when you think about that, you might want to think about who benefits or loses from not doing anything, and then deciding what we should do. And these are major questions that the global political community and every person on Earth could be thinking about. And it's important to think about these different things. It is important when we're thinking about who loses. Usually people that are more in poverty, that have less things to buffer themselves from these changes, are the people that have the most to lose. We live pretty comfortably with air conditioning. We don't have to necessarily go outside. People that work outside for their living are going to be very highly affected by these changes. And so these are all different things to think about when you're thinking about these different issues. Climate change is expected to be very expensive. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions would cost 0.5% of the world GDP, according to the Stern report. The IPCC says less than that. But if we take a long time to do anything, it could cost 20% of the world GDP to deal with all of these disasters, all of this loss of revenue. If we have whole cities go underwater, that's obviously really expensive. We have to move lots of people. We'll lose lots of infrastructure. Energy production will need to be 80% decarbonized by 2050 to stabilize the climate. That means we need to get 80% of our energy off of fossil fuels, not emitting greenhouse gases. Those in richer countries will be able to buffer the effects of climate change. We have the money to, put towards healthcare or to have air conditioning available. When we have major heat waves in major cities in the United States, we set up cooling centers. So we have, fitness centers or churches or places with air conditioning. We open those up to people that don't have air conditioning in their homes. This is really important in the north because a lot of homes don't have air conditioning. But in the south, if you can't afford your electricity bill, you're also not going to have air conditioning. So these cooling centers can be really important. Poor countries are going to suffer the most. At least 200 million people are projected to become refugees of floods or drought. And we see that already when there are major weather problems, major disasters. We do see a lot of refugees caused by weather patterns. When we know about this in this country from hurricanes, where lots of people have to move away from an area when they're are major hurricane disasters, but in other places where there are severe droughts, and people have lost their crops and things like that, they have to move to go to places where food is available. So it's important to think about that, not just about ourselves, but countries may need to be able to take in more climate refugees if there are other places going underwater or just not suitable any longer for human activity that used to occur in those places. When we talk about what should we do, it's important to think about which countries have contributed the most to these problems. So the United States is definitely the major contributor to climate change. Part of this is because we have a huge population. We are the third most populous country in the world, so we have a large proportion of the world's people. So obviously that means that we produce a lot of emissions as an industrialized nation. You can see that we burn a lot of fossil fuels. We also change the landscape to some degree. China is number 2. They have a lot more people than we do. If they continue to industrialize at the rate that they are, they could exceed the United States because they have many more people than we do. Russia comes after China, again, a very large country, and then some other large population countries like Brazil and Indonesia. If you add up all of Europe, Europe also contributes a large degree of both fossil fuel emissions as well as land use emissions, though their land use change occurred longer ago than in the United States.